there, creatives. Thanks so much for your continued listenership to the Creative Psychotherapist podcast. Today is going to be another episode from the Voices from the Expressive Therapies Summit special series. I am delighted to share this conversation with Megan VanMeter. Oh my gosh. It was amazing. She is a wealth of knowledge, and I feel like the way she put certain things into theoretical context really kind of grounded a few thoughts that I was already having about certain things about our work that we do. Um, so I really hope that you enjoy this conversation. She goes deep into understanding burnout and the differences between burnout and compassion fatigue and vicarious traumatization and secondary traumatic stress, and really talks about how all of these things relate to systemic issues that we have. It's just a really great conversation. And so I hope that you enjoy listening.
The Creative Psychotherapist is the official podcast of the Creative Clinicians Corner, a practice-building resource for creative psychotherapists. TCP Podcast is the cast for creative, expressive, and experiential-focused psychotherapists curious to learn how to design, build, and scale a thriving private practice. Your host, Raina Lombardi, interviews successful therapists about the tools and strategies they have used to develop creative, focused practices. They also talk about the products, services, and side hustles they have developed using their knowledge and creativity to enhance their therapy practices, make a greater impact in their communities, and diversify their income streams. Welcome. Now here's your host, Raina Lombardi.
Thanks so much for listening to the Creative Psychotherapist podcast. I'm your host, Raina Lombardi, and I'm excited for this episode of the Voices from the Expressive Therapies Summit special series. Today, I'm going to be speaking with Megan VanMeter, and she is a board certified registered art therapist with clinical licenses in Arizona as a licensed professional counselor, Indiana as a licensed mental health counselor, and Texas as a licensed professional counselor with the art therapy specialty designation and board approved supervisor status. She's especially interested in burnout prevention, intervention, and postvention for helping professionals, and has a virtual private practice where she provides art therapy to support these special people. Megan's experiences in behavioral health, correctional, educational, medical, and social services settings exposed her to the wide world of burnout and led her to question the training process of helpers, which doesn't address knowledge and skills in the area of burning bright throughout one's career. She has served the art therapy profession through board and committee work at local, regional, and national levels. A scholar at heart, Megan enjoys doing research, giving presentations, and writing about the Expressive Therapies Continuum, an integrative, pan-theoretical model developed by her graduate professors in the 70s and embraced by current art therapists for its relevance to contemporary advances in neuroscience. One day her writings will finally be published. In the meantime, she uses this model to ground her practice and guide her efforts to educate others about burnout. Thanks for being here, Megan.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Oh boy. So I'm thinking, where should we start? You've been in the field a long time, and obviously burnout is central to the work that you do. Um, like what pulled you in that direction clinically?
Well, it happened, I would say, a good dozen years ago. I was living in Austin, Texas, which is a place that has a robust crop of mental health professionals. And they do tend to prefer life on the cutting edge. Um, rather than same old tried and true theories and approaches. They're a little more outside the box. And I was working for a public school district. I was, of course, the only art therapist. That's kind of the story in all our careers. We are the only
Right.
ones. But I would go to continuing ed that was available to me in Austin. And it began to get on my nerves that it was pretty much biased toward the verbal and the conscious,
Mm-hmm.
and did nothing to address the person of the helper. And I began to piece things together as I was watching these therapists around me who were scrambling from one continuing ed event to the next, looking for something that was going to feed them. But it wasn't, because it was a bunch of nuts and bolts and techniques. And I realized this is what imposter syndrome looks like. This chronic need to run out and get certifications and attend all these events, looking for the thing that will make a good therapist, when probably in graduate school, that step was missed. So I attended a great program. We had to be in therapy. We practiced on each other. It was entirely experiential. And so when we got into our practicum settings, of course, we felt nervous and,
Mm-hmm.
didn't know what we were doing, but we didn't feel ashamed. And I got the sense that the therapists around me were feeling some kind of shame. So I put together a small business for providing art-based continuing education and professional development for psychotherapists. And it never really flew because I was working full-time, and in a school district, that means, 10 to 12 hours a day. And so I didn't have time to really do business with this business. And in the end, what people really wanted from me were more techniques to make people talk. They weren't really interested in learning about the person providing the services and how that bolsters all of their clinical efforts. There wasn't the buy-in. So then I went off to teach for a couple of years in a graduate art therapy program and saw firsthand that, nope, not all art therapy programs reinforce that their students are developing that person of the helper identity. The program I was in threw students into their first internship setting in the first semester.
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't know the difference between a theory and a treatment plan. And just the overwhelm, the anxiety that I saw was nothing like what I saw in my own cohort when I went through grad school. And there was pretty much no attention paid, like I said, to the evolving, emerging person of the therapist. And I realized this is what it's like for everybody. It wasn't just the people I saw in Austin and me making educated guesses about what their graduate programs lacked, but I saw, it's in art therapy too. It's endemic. And if it's not happening in therapy programs, it's not happening in med school. It's not happening in nursing school. I know from working in the K through 12 setting, it wasn't happening in the training programs for teachers.
No.
So all of these helpers are thrown out there to do their magic work with an imposter syndrome going on, basically.
Yeah.
And this there are many factors that relate to burnout, but this is a contributing factor. And so my teaching stint came to an end when the pandemic kicked in. And all I was hearing about was, the helping professionals are taking a big hit. And I thought, I'd been fighting the private practice bug since 2003. I decided, I guess it's time. And I'm here to serve helping professionals who identify with burnout. We use lots of different terminology to describe what it is. The terms mean different things, and I try to help people understand. It's like emotional psychoeducation.
Mm-hmm.
There's a difference between angry upset and sad upset. Upset is a generic term, and burnout is a generic term as well, but it does have some circumstantial meanings. But yeah, that's why I decided to take all of my experiences and plug them into a private practice to serve people who serve others.
I love that. I feel like it's so needed. I'm a supervisor, and I do I've been doing clinical supervision for quite some time, and I see that too in my supervisees, and even when they are, when they talk about their experiences within their internship sites when they were a grad student. For many, they're just, okay, here you go do your thing. And they don't have a lot of support and guidance. And not that people need hand holding, but I do think that they benefit tremendously from observation and being able to grow and learn alongside another professional rather than, sometimes I feel like the systems kind of treat the graduate student interns as, unpaid help,
Mm-hmm.
right? But they're not really getting good training. They're just kind of, treading water, trying to figure it out. It's hard.
Yeah. And supervision is not something that can take care of all of this. The
No,
supervision is supposed to be what happens when the rubber meets the road, not let's examine the rubber and find out
right.
what that's really made of.
No, but it brings up those things of like you have to go do some of your own work too.
Mhm.
Um and realize that this is a systemic thing, that it's not a you thing. Um,
That's huge. That's part of the shame
mhm,
is
mhm.
if our training programs are not overtly developing the person, the internal person of the helper, the natural consequences are, of course, imposter syndrome and yada, yada, yada. And then there's shame. And no one really wants to talk about it because then they feel like they really are the imposter. And everyone's just trotting around to continuing ed workshops and racking up certifications after their name to prove that really they're legitimate. And the problem is not that they never were legitimate. The problem is that they didn't feel as though they were legitimate.
Yeah, I can resonate with that, and definitely have had those kinds of conversations with other people. Like, maybe I need to go get this, certification. Maybe I need to get, this credential or that credential. But um, are you really passionate about that particular modality? Then maybe. But if you're just doing it for credibility, you're going to get that and still feel the same, right?
Exactly.
We're not addressing the root.
Right. Right. And I've linked the therapeutic process to the creative process. If you look at George Wallas's model of the stages of creativity or the phases in the creative process, you've got preparation. That's let's figure out what exactly the problem is. And the next stage is the stage that makes all therapists terrified because it rears the head of imposter syndrome, and that's incubation, where it looks like maybe the client is kind of wandering around doing nothing in therapy. And that's when art therapists get requests from other therapists. I need some art technique to make people talk. Like, no, you never learned to deal with your own anxiety around a client's incubation period. This is part of the creative process. The third phase is illumination, and all therapists love that because now the client is clear on what they're going to do to solve their problems. And then of course the fourth phase is verification, where they so how did that work? And if it didn't work, they go back to some earlier stage in the creative process, and if it did work, they move forward. But that incubation process really triggers our imposter syndrome. And if the therapist isn't knowledgeable about what that does to them, it can
Yeah.
totally throw off the client's creative process.
Mm.
Because the therapist wants them to get out of incubation as fast as possible. And that's not how it works.
No, we can't rush that part, right? Like, you think of birth, you think of, pregnancy. You you can't rush that incubation gestation period, right? The little baby's got to be in there for a while before they're ready to make an appearance. I think that that's true of our like growth process too. Needs to be in there for a while. And sometimes we have to sit with that uncomfortable silence, which for some people is uncomfortable, but it, it's there's something happening when we're able to do that.
There is, and it might not be verbal and conscious. In fact, it probably isn't. That's why fabulous inventors who are well known have great ideas while they're mowing the lawn,
Right.
Something's happening, but it's not accessible to immediate awareness. So it's not going to show up in the therapy session. And the therapist may mistakenly think I'm a bad therapist, or they'll blame it on the client. The client is stuck. No, maybe you need to befriend the incubation period and learn to deal with ambiguity and uncertainty, because that's the task of the incubation period.
I love that. I've never thought about it from that theoretical model. But I definitely have thought about it from more of like an attachment perspective of just being alongside somebody as they're going through and just allowing that space for them to do whatever they need, even if I don't understand what it is that they're doing, just trusting that they know what it is that they need to do and they're being guided to act in that way during that time. And then if we can sit through that, just really magical things happen.
Yeah, exactly. The client has their illumination at the right time, in the right way, and they're growing in a way that they're supposed to, not the way that the certification program said they were supposed to.
Yes, or the insurance. Right? When we take insurance, there's this pressure of this like tempoed model of like we're supposed to get from A to Z in this number of hours together. And that's just not the way humans work.
No, and it also further gives therapists fear of the incubation period, because now they have to document that it looks like nothing's happening. How are we going to justify continuation of services? What's the medical need when I can't demonstrate that I'm helping this person make progress? So there's systemic stuff that gets in the way. Unfortunately, it's very misguided.
What is your suggestion about how to document something like that if somebody is in that incubation period? How would you go about saying that?
I'm not a pro at this, I'm a learner at this, but collaborative documentation is a way to help the therapist assess what things look like through the client's eyes.
Beautiful.
Because this is a huge resource. It's a huge pool of information sitting right in front of you. And so few therapists think to ask the clients, so what did you get out of today's session? What was the most meaningful thing that happened in here to you? I do outcomes style conversations with clients to ask them at the end of every session, how was this for you? Did you feel seen, heard, understood? Was my approach a good fit for you today? I want the feedback to know, ooh, I was, perhaps too directive, or I wasn't directive enough with this person, or, maybe I rolled my eyes and I shouldn't have, whatever it is. The client feedback is helping me get fine-tuned to what the person in front of me needs. So using the client as a source of expert information is something that a lot of therapists are actually afraid to do because they're afraid the client is going to say, "You're a terrible therapist and none of this works." And there's a certain small percentage of clients who might go that route. And usually they have specific diagnoses and treatment issues. So we're kind of aware this could happen anyhow. But most clients want, if you really, really make it apparent that you're interested in honesty,
Mhm.
that opens the door for them to start having honest conversations in other parts of their lives.
Yeah.
So it's really fabulous for the client to be providing the therapist with info about how they think the session went and how they're learning and growing. There was a
Mm.
study years ago, and I don't even know who was behind it. I was just told of this, but a study that found there is zero correlation between how a client thinks a session went and how a therapist thinks a session went.
That doesn't surprise me.
So even if you, the therapist, think this is incubation and nothing's happening, the client might be like, "Wow, that was amazing. I have so many new things to think about." And if you don't ask for that input, you'll never
Mhm.
know.
Yeah, no, that's really good. That's really great advice for folks that are listening. And I love that idea of collaborative documentation. I haven't done that myself, but I I'm aware that it exists. But what I'm hearing from you is they don't have to actually sit down with you and like type it out, but you just ask them directly and they can provide you with the verbal feedback and you can integrate it. Um, I know in some
Yeah.
of the groups that I do, I'll give like surveys at the end, like anonymous feedback of like, what could I do better? What, what worked for you? What didn't? Similar kind of questions like, did you feel listened to and attended to and supported? Because that is really important.
It is. It is. And if the therapist can build that into their face to face time, whether that's in
Mhm.
person or virtual, all my services are offered virtually. But to make that part of the session, that's really the closing ritual is
Mm.
let's
Mhm.
check into our relationship. The stats are so strong on the relationship being a huge factor in outcomes.
Yeah,
So you don't want to take it for granted that there's a great alliance and the client thinks you're the therapist you want to be.
gotcha. Yeah, no, that's true. And I think sometimes, they they might be hesitant to give you some critical feedback because when they've given critical feedback to others in the past, the response was not good, not helpful. So being able to handle those conversations and model how to how is it to receive critical feedback and to be able to respond from a calm, regulated state and appreciate, okay, thank you for telling me that. And, what can I do differently to make it better? Or I feel like that corrective or like modeling of how to have those challenging conversations also can be really impactful.
Definitely. And the information I've read about collaborative documentation is that it helps um, increase, I guess, the client's ownership of what's happening in therapy.
Mhm.
Instead of I show up and we do this therapy thing and then I go on with my day, if they know that some of what you're writing in your notes is based on their feedback, their input, not just the random things they were saying while they weren't thinking about, oh, this person will write a note when we're done. But if they know that this has something to do with their record and it's in my informed consent that, yeah, I seek out information like this and we make it part of your record. And if there's a discrepancy, if I think the session went, this way and the client thinks it went that way,
Mhm.
I have an opportunity to enter both into my note to make sure that there's the two narratives instead of just, the client said this, but I think they're wrong because I think it went this way. Instead they're
Yeah.
just two narratives. We saw the session differently. Here's what I saw, and here's what the client saw.
I love
So
that.
it
It's so
makes sense.
respectful.
Yeah. So there's not an agreement that we're going to agree on everything before it goes into the notes. We can have different points of view, and both points of view can go into the notes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really cool. So when you're working with clients and you're working on um, the effects of burnout and helping people to really find their energy source again, because I feel like burnout just like drains people. They're just so tired and fatigued, and the energy that it takes to do everything is just not there. What what's your how are you integrating the expressive therapies continuum in your approach with burnout?
Well, the Expressive Therapies Continuum, or the ETC,
Mhm.
undergirds everything I do. I graduated from grad school in '92, so this has been in me for quite some time. Way before mainstream psychotherapy thought sensory information processing had anything to do with a person's mental world. Way before they were preaching the gospel of integration.
Mm,
So this has undergirded a lot of what I've done all along, and how I use it in my practice that is geared toward helping professionals, certainly others as well. But I have them do a self-assessment. I've sort of deconstructed the um, therapeutic aspects of the different components of the expressive therapies continuum. There's kinesthetic, sensory, perceptual, affective, cognitive, and symbolic. And then there's the creative level, or the creative dimension. So I really have 4 questions each along those different 7 categories. Which of these areas are you concerned about? And so they just give me the self-report. I haven't identified in the questionnaire which questions go with which component. They don't know, they haven't heard the terms before anyhow. So I get a self-report, and I can kind of score that looking at where they think they're strong, where they think they're not. Then I do, after we get through the magic of the intake process, all those necessary questions, then I do my actual art therapy evaluation with them. And I ask them, they bring the art materials, and I ask them to just create
mhm,
while I watch. They've got a second camera, so do I. And the second camera is trained on the workspace, so I can watch their hands in action and see the little zoom box of their face. So I can watch affective changes, but I really need to see what their hands are doing, what is going on in the art making process, because that is neurological activity in motion. And of course,
mm,
what the art products are beginning to look like.
mhm,
That too is data for me in terms of assessing where on the expressive therapies continuum am I seeing over functioning, under functioning, or blocked functioning. It may or may not match up with the self report. For example, if someone has blocked sensory information processing, they're not concerned about it. So all those questions they'll answer like, no, this is fine in my life, not realizing, well, it's because you're blocking it.
mhm,
So sometimes I get different results when I'm doing the actual evaluation, the experiential evaluation, and I'm looking for those indicators in the art making behavior, the art products themselves, and the client's verbalizations. And so after about 3 different art making experiences, I have a skeleton, an idea of here's the pattern I'm seeing. So I'll present it back to them. Give them psychoeducation on the framework. We take a look at it. I explain, this is how I see things. This is the
mhm,
model that I use. This is what it means. And I look for where things aren't pieced together very neatly. They've fallen out of integration. And I want my clients to know what I'm seeing, not just, I don't want them to go through a mysterious process called therapy. I want them to be able to see, oh, we got some broken links. We're going to reconnect things. That's going to be the goal. And so if what I get after 3 experiential opportunities with them, if the data I give back to them doesn't make sense to them, that just means I need more assessment data. So, okay, 2 more sessions where we're creating and I'm really collecting data. So it's at whenever I've either got 3 or 5, we want an odd numbers to break any ties. And just looking at, through the assessment process, where are they strong? Where are they not strong? What's missing, if anything? And then I present it to them in terms of, this is where you're strong. So this is this is our home base. This is where we're going to start treatment, is where you are strong. So it's not, a protocol. There's 0 protocols when you are using the Expressive Therapies Continuum. It's where is the client strong? That's where you start therapy. And then the rest is you are creating integration by helping them connect to the other missing pieces. You're not hammering away at the missing pieces or doing stuff like that. That's not the Expressive Therapies Continuum, though I know there are people out there who don't understand the ETC and think they do. And so that's how they're attempting to use it, but that is not the ETC. It's really integrative and educating. I'm working with adults. When I worked in the school district, believe it or not all K through 12 kids wanted to learn about the ETC's framework. So I didn't explain it all to them, but I explained it to their parents. But yeah, most of my clients now are interested in learning what I see so they can start to see it too, and to translate these concepts into what else is going on in their lives and how they can sort of shore up their superpowers and recognize when they're running into something that is not their superpower and how they're going to navigate their way through that. And then the ultimate goal of treatment in the ETC is that balance of harmony and flow between the inner world and the outer world. So that's what we're really going for.
Love that. Wow. And I would say burnout probably it's not an environment where harmony and flow are happening.
Oh no, there's so much behind burnout. And historically, I guess we could say that the affective component on the ETC would take a hit, but it's different for everybody. So I can't just go saying I practice via the ETC and now you burned out person, we're going to hammer away at affect because that's where you've been weakened. It doesn't work like that. But yeah, just a giant chasm between the demands of the inner world and the demands of the external world when you're looking at burnout.
Yeah. So are there any indicators that people may not be aware of, therapists may not be aware of, that they're feeling burned out, but they're not recognizing it as that? What might those be?
Well, do I have a moment to do a little psychoeducation here?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. This is where terminology is so important, because burnout is a term that gets thrown around. And I want to help people understand that there's actually a bunch of stuff it's made of. One of them could be compassion fatigue. And compassion fatigue is what happens when you are using empathy with people in pain and you feel physically and emotionally exhausted. If you have physical and emotional exhaustion, you're not necessarily burnt out. That's going to be compassion fatigue. Then there's vicarious traumatization, where the work you're doing as a helper has kind of poisoned the way you look at the world, and you have a negative outlook and think, I'm just one person. I can't save this world from its toxic self. We're on a path for self-destruction and I'm just one person. I don't think I'm making a difference in the world.
Mm.
So that's not emotional and physical. That's more intellectual, the kinds of thoughts we have. And then, of course, that shapes our feelings as well. So that's vicarious traumatization. That's not necessarily burnout. And then there's secondary traumatic stress, which is you are aware that the stories and images that are dancing through your head are your client's stories and images. They're not yours, but they're still having a traumatizing effect on you.
Mm.
That is not burnout. That's secondary traumatic stress. Burnout always implicates at least one of those three: compassion fatigue, vicarious traumatization, and secondary traumatic stress. But it's this perfect storm: factors specific to the helping professional, factors specific to the population being helped, and factors that are specific to the setting or the situation where the helping takes place. So for the helping professionals part, it's helping professionals don't like to ask for help. They get marooned on an island, and guess what? Burnout can come and attack you that way. You're like vulnerable. If you didn't have solid education and training in developing a foundation as the person of the helper, you're also at risk. If your nervous system has ever known marginalization and oppression, you are at risk for succumbing to burnout faster than your peers who have not known marginalization and oppression. So those are factors related to the helper, factors related to the population being served. If you're only seeing people at their worst, that's just going to be your day in and day out narrative running through your head. It's what you're exposed to is the worst. If you have clients perhaps who are combative and unruly and want to blame you and that sort of thing, and you're just trying to help, that takes a hit. Interpersonal neurobiology is two-way, and most trainings never talk about what happens to the therapist in interpersonal neurobiology.
No.
So that's an issue. And then factors related to the setting or the situation, administrative expectations that are unrealistic, working conditions that are unreasonable.
Mm-hmm.
So think systems, but there are so many of us in private practice who are experiencing burnout. We have taken the institutionalization that we were raised in through our academic program, our internships, and our jobs, and we said, no, I'm going into private practice and I'm never going to swallow anybody's garbage again. I'm going to do treatment right. But what they don't realize is they've internalized servanthood. US labor law is based on an old UK labor law called master and servant. And so we all are brought up to be servants. And then when we step out into private practice, we don't realize we need to be deprogrammed to become the master. And so we're just reliving the servanthood tapes. And now many therapists are running to the dictates of insurance companies. They are bowing to the demands of clients. They really aren't the master, they're the servant, and they hate their private practice and they think they've chosen the wrong field and they're despondent, when really they need a deprogramming process. So burnout's made up of all of these things. So if anyone listening identifies with any of that, I'm talking about you, and it's not your fault.
Yeah, just that last part, I think, I hope that people really heard that so oftentimes, like, we repeat what we know. And if we're coming out of those systems, we're unintentionally recreating the same system that wasn't working before, and we can't do that. And I'm so glad that you said that.
Well, you are welcome. People need to hear this. It's about coming into conscious awareness of what your journey has been and how you have absorbed so much that has been detrimental to you, which is why you stepped out into private practice. But now you've recreated the same patterns. You've gotten yourself on every insurance panel. You see every client who walks through the door. You set your fees as low as you possibly can. because people are hurting and shouldn't have to pay money for treatment. There's a lot of martyrdom, and it's been systemically reinforced. And when you consider most mental health professionals, the market is just swimming with, females, basically, people who
Mhm.
at least were socialized as females, where you're a servant.
Mhm.
You're a
Yeah.
servant. You're there to meet others' needs. You're supposed to give until it feels good. If you are in this for money, there's something wrong with you and you're bad. So
Right.
we have all these psychological discomforts with money. Well, that's not healthy when you're going into business for yourself. Like, you have to keep your
No.
doors open so you can serve people. If you're if you don't believe that your income should sustain your life, who are you looking at to sustain your life? And that means you're not independent, you're dependent. So you're in servant mode again. There's a
I
lot.
I love every single thing that you just stated, every single word. And I'm so glad that there are other people that feel that way and that see it through that lens and that are speaking up to make changes. Because I feel like part of the reason why we have so much stigma about mental health and um, it goes back to all of this, right?
Mhm.
This idea that we shouldn't be in it for money, and we should be making our services accessible to everyone, when really we're not going to be doing a good job if we do that, because we're going to be serving people with stuff that we're not experts in really addressing and holding space for. But the other piece is, if we feel terrible, if we are out of energy, if we don't have that light within us, we're not going to be effective. And the
Mm-mm.
client's going to sense that and feel that.
Mhm.
And it doesn't do anybody any good service. It just keeps us stuck in the same place, going like it's the man's fault, like, that it's like this. Well, we have to do something about that. If we continue to accept it as it is, then it will stay that way. We have to speak up. I once had a job where the the person in charge wouldn't do your annual review until you asked for it. Why? Why would they do that? So they don't have to give you a raise.
Oh my gosh.
So these things are so like deeply ingrained of like, we're not supposed to speak up and ask for that. And if we do, we're bad, right? We're shamed. It goes back to the shame part.
Mhm. Yeah. And now we're imposters again. We're not good. And yeah, if you let your imposter syndrome run your practice, you're going to need to see 40 to 50 clients a week to make ends meet, because you're giving a sliding scale to everyone, which legally is questionable because it shows favor toward the people who ask for it,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
whether or not they have financial need. Um, yeah, you will be saying yes to everyone who calls you up, whether or not you can actually help them. And you will feel terrible about the services you provide, which feeds your imposter syndrome further. And then you spend time, energy, and money you don't have chasing after more continuing ed and certifications. So at some point, we have to say, oh, this isn't working. I'll raise my hand and ask for some assistance, which is really a sign of not giving up. And I think too many
Yeah.
helping professionals don't reach out, even when they recognize they're in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
They will not ask for help because they don't think that's within their identity and it proves they're an imposter. But really, all it does is it is an indication that you're not giving up on yourself.
I love that reframe. Yeah. It's courageous.
Mhm.
courageous to ask for help.
And you're saying no to the system.
Mhm.
Even if you're a private practitioner, it's still the system you've created. By raising your hand and saying, yes, I would like to have some support as I figure out how to do this better. Um, that's just, you are on the road to success already for having done that.
Mhm.
You're not going to bow down to the things that aren't working and figure out what's wrong with you because they're not working.
Yeah, I think as therapists, we have so much more to give that will make a greater impact when we're able to have that creative energy to give in other ways besides just the one-on-one direct client care, because there's only so much benefit that we can provide in that space and time, and that model. And if we're seeing 30 plus people a week, there is no creative energy to do something else like write a book, or create like a particular, maybe it's an intervention system, or an assessment tool, like whatever it is that you have the knowledge about and skills to, if you shared it with a larger, broader audience, is going to, I think, have a positive ripple effect in our community, right? The health of our community is really measured by the health of each individual within the community. And so, you know, we can be providing resources out there to folks that maybe they don't meet the criteria to come in to have individual one-on-one treatment, but they do need support, or they want extra knowledge to open up their awareness and insight, or maybe it's to help other professionals with their work and growth. But if we're burning ourselves out, we there's no way we can do that.
No, and I think what most therapists really don't understand is that direct service does have its limitations. You can only reach so many people, in your whole lifetime. Either you can only cram so many people into your lifetime, but you can have a much bigger reach
Mhm.
when you have positioned yourself to be financially comfortable and not feel guilty for being financially comfortable, and really give to a bigger community in these bigger ways that can reach so many people. Part of my inspiration for this private practice is in helping professionals. I can help a whole lot of people.
Yeah.
And then I've got, of course, all the other projects that are in my head and somewhere in the works that are like, yeah, here are the ways that I want to make an impact. And it's not always through that face to face. The face to face feeds me on multiple levels.
Mhm.
But then there's all this other stuff that doesn't involve a client sitting in front of me. There are many, many ways to give back. But if you are doing the 40 clients a week at bargain basement fees and dragging yourself around town to accomplish the bare minimum, you're not going to be able to give back to your community, really. There's not enough of you left.
Right. I think too, it's hard for folks that are doing that over an extended period of time to even give back to their own family, like to be present with their own family. And, they don't have that space to give either. Um, and that's just a really hard place to be. So I'm glad that you created that. COVID encouraged you to create your practice, because what you're doing is really important. And I think that it has the potential to help people stay in the field that have good skills, that have, a great ability to help people, but without compromising their their self in the process.
Right. We don't want that. We want people burning bright. And, we have to do for ourselves what our graduate programs didn't do for us, which is figure this out. How do I burn bright throughout my career? And enough with chasing the self-care unicorn. That's just an institutional tool for blaming you. You see, you know, people who are heavily traumatized all week long. Aren't you taking enough bubble baths to compensate for this? You know, People don't have any education about self-care either. So that's
No.
one of my little missions as well. To help people debunk that whole myth and really learn how to enrich their life. Lisa Hinz, she's the most published super author for the Expressive Therapies Continuum. She has a book called Beyond Self-Care for Helping Professionals. And I weave that into presentations that I give for helping professionals and help them understand the difference between nebulous self-care, which is really just trying to keep your life functions going, eat right, sleep well, that sort of thing, and life enrichment, which is what you need to keep that magic alive inside you. And it's doable, it's within reach, it doesn't cost a whole bunch of extra money and time. It's really just directing your attention to things you might already be doing.
This episode of the podcast is sponsored by my practice, Florida Art Therapy Services. And we provide art therapy services, mental health services, and high quality supervision for licensed folks in Florida, as well as for art therapy credentials. And we also provide experiential based continuing education programming. And we provide that for licensed folks in the state of Florida, but also our continuing ed can be used to satisfy the requirements for the Art Therapy Credentials Board continuing education requirements. And we have a couple of courses that really focus on developing supervisory practice. One is a 12-hour Florida qualified supervisor training. It's a 2-day training, and we have a couple of options coming up this fall for folks. We're going to have an in-person, in-office training, which will be limited to 15 people on September 24th and 25th, 2022. And it's going to be awesome. We're going to be engaging in lots of really great experiential activities. I teach this class with Amy Strom, who's a licensed clinical social worker. And part of what we do is have you engage in creating a sand tray about your supervisory identity, and as our kind of culminating event at the end of day 2, which is always really fun. We haven't done it in person since pandemic hit, so we're really excited about that. We also have another Zoom training, also 2 days, and that's going to be October 15th and 16th, 2022. And we'll still engage in experiential activities, and we make plenty use of the breakout rooms and interactive group discussion and things. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, if you're a licensed therapist in the state of Florida, please go ahead and head over to our website, floridaarttherapyservices.com, and you can find that under the continuing education tab under 12-hour Florida qualified supervisor. And I haven't added the next date yet, but we will have a date coming up for a 6-hour supervision and art therapy training, which I hosted earlier this year, which was really wonderful. We go over theory, structure, applications, practical aspects, plus didactic and experiential based activities to really synthesize the learning that we're engaged in. And so we'll be adding another opportunity for that this fall. So if that's something that you're interested in, you can find that under the continuing education tab as well. And we have a couple of other trainings too coming up. So check that out and enjoy the rest of the podcast.
and maximizing it then and really reaping the benefits. Like for an affective lift, what I do is I keep a bouquet of fresh flowers at my desk.
Mm.
And all I have to do is look up and poof, there's this affective lift. I didn't have to go out and, see an uplifting movie and invest the time and energy that way. It's sitting right here at my desk. I pick it up at the grocery store. It's not, doesn't cost an arm and a leg. It doesn't cost me a whole bunch of time, but it's effective. And I
Mhm.
remind myself, I want my life to be a beautiful bouquet of flowers. So it gives me
Yeah.
something to reach toward. So there are all kinds of these little micro ways that people can be using to reinforce themselves in ways that go far beyond eat right and get enough sleep.
Yeah. I feel like the creative aspects of our life are such an important part of self care. When I was in grad school, I did my thesis on burnout and self care,
Oh,
and
wow.
like what art therapists in particular were doing, and how much the creative process was part of their self care routine. And I, like you, feel like, there are certain things that I don't think they really qualify as self care, at least not for me. Going to get my nails done
Mm-mm.
is nice for like 5 minutes, but that's not really enduring. That's not feeding my soul. Like I need that for me, self-care is like, what are the things that really feed my soul and help me to connect with awe and like that, just that feeling of being open and love and connectedness, right? Those kinds of things, which creativity, different creative practices um, provide that. And being in nature provides that. Meditation provides that. Um, but yeah.
Yeah, it's about having a rich menu of things to choose from so you don't habituate. If the walking in nature does it for you, well, if that's all you have, eventually it's not going to be effective and you'll fall into despair. So
Mm-hmm.
it's really having this enriched variety of easy peasy opportunities
Mm-hmm.
to deepen that connection and help you build resilience, because some people still think resilience is bouncing back, but that's not it. It's really about the opportunity, the ability to make choice in the face of challenge. And when
Mm.
you are coming from an enriched place within your soul, you can make choice rather than defaulting or being reactive when challenge comes along. And burnout and all its companion syndromes, the compassion fatigue, vicarious traumatization, and secondary traumatic stress, they really put us at risk for just being reactive.
Yeah.
We're not connected to anything, so all we can do is react. We've lost that connection to ourselves in the name of serving others. Again, we've become servants and have forgotten that we really need to be our own master.
Yeah, yes, 100%. I just love everything that um, you have said. And I really do hope you write a book because I, I, I would be lining up to buy it. You're a wealth of knowledge on this topic, and the way that you talk about it makes it so accessible, um, that you're breaking down all of these terms so that people really can understand the differences and why it's important to understand the differences and what to do about it. That there are options for us. We don't have to maintain that perpetual cycle of servitude, that there's a better way.
Yes, there is. And it's the way we would want for our clients. So why don't we want it for us?
Yes, that's so true. So
We don't want our
true.
clients to be servants in their own lives.
No. And so we have to be willing to do that work ourselves,
Yeah.
right? When we can do that, that becomes a powerful shift in the way we work with others too, because there's more capacity. We have a greater capacity to hold space for that ambiguity that we had started off talking about in the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
because we know what it's like to be in our own ambiguity and go through that ourselves.
And deal with whatever anxiety and fears come up as a result of it. But it's inevitable in life. There's going to be ambiguity, whether you've put yourself on that path or the path found you.
Yeah.
So, and when you're connected to yourself, you have so much more inside for nurturing yourself through that process and then
Right.
nurturing a client through that process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. More compassionate. We can be compassionate with ourselves, not shame ourselves, but hold that space of non-judgment and just, pause, give ourselves some emotional distancing and just observe, like, oh, okay, that's what's happening right now. And um, I recognize
Yeah.
that.
And
I've been there before.
yeah, and recognizing too that it's part of a larger process. This is just where I am in the process. I'm just waiting for my illumination to come along. And we all want it to come in the next 5 minutes, but sometimes it takes 5 months, 5 years, who knows? Um, Learning to understand where you are in your own process can really decrease anxiety.
Mm, yeah, absolutely. Right. Like so much anxiety is about, I don't know what's happening. And
Mm-hmm.
since I don't know what's happening, I don't necessarily feel safe. I don't feel comfortable. But if I have a framework that kind of puts everything that I'm going through into context, even though I still don't know what exactly is going to occur, I know that there's a process at play, and that can provide enough structure um, to let that anxiety ease a bit.
Yeah, definitely. I had a client who was a musician. Um, and when I introduced him to the creative process, I mean, I'd introduced him to the Expressive Therapies Continuum. So we knew where we were working there and why treatment was going the way it was going. But it really helped him to understand those 4 phases of Wallas's creative
Mm,
process because he recognized incubation had value. It didn't just mean that he
yeah.
was stuck or he was bad. It was a part of this larger process that was his creativity.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. I think, we all have incubation periods for different things. You shared at the beginning, you had been thinking about putting a private practice together since 2003, I think you said,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
right? So that was a long process of holding space for that before um, it was created. And I think that's so true in all of our endeavors. And when we can recognize that, that really helps to not feel like, oh, like it's okay that I'm not there yet. I don't have to be there yet, because there's always that pressure of, like you're saying, like needs to be done now. Um, and it's okay if it's not done now.
No, it's not time.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
cooking.
It's cooking, right? And
Yes.
then when I feel like for me anyway, like I'll know, like, okay, this is going to happen. Like I knew I was going to do the podcast for a couple of years before I actually launched the podcast, and it was cooking, and I wasn't sure when it was going to happen, but it was like just a snap, like it's time. Right? Like,
Mm.
okay, now it's happening now. And then once I had that snap, everything fell into place rather quickly. And same with opening my own practice. I was like, oh no, I'll stay under the wings of somebody else's practice. Like this is comfortable and safe for me. I don't want to go out there and do it on my own. But then it was like a flash. Uh, nope, it's time for me to go. And then it was time. I don't know. It might just be me. Like that's how it works for me. Like I just know instantly when it happens.
You have some good mojo going on. My process is a little different. It's not this clear, stark thing, and then things just take off. Sometimes it's a clear, stark thing, and then I wander through the muck of, well, how do I create the thing that comes next?
Well, I get that too, but that's usually after it's going. It's going, and then I'm like, okay, now like it's going. Now what do I do? And then it starts that cycle over again. Like,
Yeah, you're back to the problem finding in the first phase of the creative process.
yeah,
Yeah.
so
We're
fun.
we're never done being creative.
No, absolutely not.
No, and burnout just shoots everyone in the creative process, which is why it hurts so much to be divorced from our own creative spirit. So I hope, my hope is that helping professionals will recognize that, yeah, they deserve that. They deserve to be reconnected with their creative spirit, and they don't have to live this life of servitude.
I love that. If the helping professionals that are listening to the show would like to learn more about you, where can they find more information about you?
The best place would be my website, which is meganvanmeter.com.
Okay.
No fancy spellings, meganvanmeter.com. And if anyone is interested in a freebie bibliography about the Expressive Therapies Continuum, I do have a page on my website for that. It currently says
Awesome.
for expressive therapists. I might change it to Expressive Therapies Continuum. But you can sign up to be on the monthly newsletter list for ETC news updates. And like I said, starting people out with a comprehensive bibliography of all the available published works
That's
concerning the Expressive
wonderful.
Therapies Continuum.
Yeah, I will definitely put that in the show notes. And for folks that are interested in learning more from you, you're going to be teaching at the Expressive Therapy Summit in November, which is completely online. So people can attend from wherever. Um, and you're going to be speaking with a group of people, panel of people about the expressive therapies continuum as a framework for using expressive arts and therapy. Who are you going to be speaking with at the event?
I am going to be speaking with, I'm a first generation ETC student. I studied under the creators of the Expressive Therapies Continuum. And Lisa Hinz, super author of the ETC, she's also a first generation student. She'll be presenting as well. And then the others are second generation students. They would be her students.
Oh, wonderful.
Maria Riccardi, she's kind of the ETC go-to woman in Canada. And Joshua Nann, who is over in Hong Kong. I believe he's relocating, but sticking around in that general region of Asia. And then the third panelist is someone I have not met yet.
Oh,
But she's someone Lisa is very excited about and has been applying the principles of the ETC in poetry.
oh, that sounds really interesting. I would love to learn about how that works with expressive writing. As an
Mm-hmm.
art therapist, I'm so, focused on the media that we use, like all of the materials, and I'm just wondering how that applies to poetry. Very interesting.
Yeah. Well, Via Lucebrink and Sandra Kagan Graves Alcorn, who are the developers of the ETC, it's called the Expressive Therapies Continuum because really they recognized it does have applications in all of the
In all
expressive
the
therapies.
modalities. Yeah.
So it hasn't been fleshed out for them the way it was fleshed out in art therapy.
Yeah.
And I'm doing some digging to find how we can do some translations. But yeah, the poetry piece is going to be kind of a gem because it steps out of the art therapy framework.
Yeah. I think that would be amazing that because I have Lisa Hines' book on the continuum. And I've also read some of Sandra's writings about the continuum in other textbooks. Um, but it would be nice to have it broken down in the other modalities in the way it is fleshed out in art therapy, where it goes very in depth.
Yeah, that's going to take collaboration, obviously, with experts in
Yeah.
the other expressive therapies. But Via Lucibrink really kind of got started. She really got
Mhm.
started putting things together in a hypothetical manner, but she does have writings, so that leave us with some, a trail of breadcrumbs to follow.
That's wonderful. All right. So, if listeners, if you want to attend that panel with Megan and all the other amazing therapists that are going to be joining her, that's going to be on November 19th. And you can find that by going to the Expressive Therapies Summit.com website. Click on virtual summit, and then you can click on the program and you can just put in November 19th and the date, and then it'll be easy to find her panel. Uh, Thank you so much for your willingness to be here and talk with me today. It's been really a pleasure, and I feel like I learned so much from our conversation.
Well, thank you. I appreciated that someone wanted to hear what I have to say because it's a lot. So thanks for giving me the chance.
I, it's a lot, but it's really, really important, and I I'm glad that you're doing what you're doing because I believe that it's so needed. So thank you.
Well, thank you. What you're doing is needed as well. So, keep up the good work and don't burn out, burn bright.
I am trying my best not to burn out. That's for sure. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Creative Psychotherapist Podcast. I hope you enjoyed what you heard. If you wouldn't mind taking a moment to rate, give us some feedback, subscribe to the show, we'd be really grateful and appreciate that. I hope that you enjoyed this conversation with Megan as much as listening to it, as much as I did having it. I just found her to be very wise and um, really thinking about frameworks that can change our field in a positive way. And of course, we talked a little bit about the Expressive Therapies Continuum, which she's going to be presenting on at the upcoming Expressive Therapies Summit. But we also really talked about like self care, but what that really is and why it's important in terms of preventing burnout in our field and why we're at risk for such things. Um, she just, I feel like, put things into context grounded in different theoretical frameworks that just made a lot of sense. And so I hope that you appreciated our conversation. And if you want to learn more from her, and of course, her colleague Maria Riccardi, who was on the show last week. They're going to be presenting at the upcoming Expressive Therapy Summit. No matter where you are from around the world, you can participate because it's going to be online. They're going to be presenting on the 19th about the Expressive Therapies Continuum as an essential framework for using the expressive arts in therapy. If you're not familiar with this particular framework, I definitely would recommend checking it out and learning more about it in terms of how it can be incredibly helpful for a variety of things. Obviously, both she and Maria talk about how they integrate it into just their life work and being. But it's also a wonderful application within the work that we do in terms of guiding treatment and how to navigate different things in treatment. Anyway, you can learn more about their presentation and all of the other amazing presentations that are going to be offered at the Expressive Therapy Summit by going to www.expressivetherapiesummit.com. And I will talk with you next week, where I'm talking to another phenomenal therapist about archetypes and storytelling. And I am positive you are going to be on the edge of your seat listening, because the next guest is brilliant.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Creative Psychotherapist. If you like what you heard, please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. For show notes, downloads, and additional resources, head over to the website at www.creativeclinicianscorner.com.